My brother has been dead for 37 years. That is what I believed until 11 days ago, when the phone on my nightstand rang at 3:10 in the morning and a voice I did not recognize said my name. His name was Neil. Neil Hendricks. He was 17 the last time I saw him alive, standing on the platform at the Kingston train station with a backpack slung over one shoulder and a grin on his face because he was going to visit his buddy Jerome in Sudbury for the long weekend. It was January 1989. The coldest winter Ontario had seen in a decade. I was 22, working my first real job at a pharmacy on Princess Street, and I remember thinking he looked too young to be traveling alone. I almost said something. I almost told him to be careful. But I didn't, because Neil was 17 and invincible the way all 17-year-olds are, and I just clapped him on the shoulder and said, "Don't do anything stupid." He laughed. That was the last thing I ever heard from him. A laugh. The train derailed 14 hours later, somewhere between Parry Sound and Sudbury. A section of track had buckled in the cold, and the locomotive went sideways at full speed, dragging 6 cars with it into a ravine. They said 11 people died on impact. Neil was supposed to be in the 3rd car. I know this because I'd helped him pick his seat. He liked window seats on the left side because he said the view of the lakes was better. They called our mother first. I don't know why. Maybe because she was listed as his emergency contact, or maybe because the universe is cruel and decided that a 51-year-old woman who had already buried a husband should be the one to hear that her youngest son was gone. She called me at 6 in the morning, and she wasn't crying. That was worse. When my mother cried, it meant something was wrong. When she went silent, it meant something was broken beyond repair. I drove from Kingston to North Bay, where they'd set up a temporary morgue at the community hospital. 5 hours in the snow with the radio off because I couldn't stand the idea of hearing music while my brother was lying dead somewhere. When I got there, a constable from the OPP met me in the hallway and explained the process. Some of the bodies were badly damaged. The 3rd car had been crushed when the car behind it telescoped forward during the derailment. They needed a family member to identify the remains. I was 22 years old. I had never seen a dead body in my life, not even at a funeral, because when our father died of a heart attack when I was 16, my mother had insisted on a closed casket. She said she wanted us to remember him the way he was. So I walked into that room with no preparation, no armor, nothing between me and whatever was on that table. The man pulled back the sheet to the chest. The face was swollen and discolored, the jaw pushed to one side in a way that wasn't natural. There was so much bruising that the skin looked almost purple. But I looked at the hair, dark brown, Neil's color. I looked at the build, lean and wiry, Neil's build. I looked at the shape of the ears, and I thought I recognized them. "Is this your brother?" the constable asked. "Is this Neil Hendricks?" I said yes. I said yes because the hair was right and the build was right and because my mother was waiting at home and she needed an answer and I couldn't stand to be in that room for one more second. I said yes, and they covered the face, and I walked out into the hallway, and I sat on a plastic chair and I shook for 20 minutes before I could stand up again. We buried him on a Tuesday. St. Mary's Cemetery in Kingston, next to our father. My mother wore a black coat I had never seen before, and she didn't speak for 3 days after the funeral. She didn't speak much after that, to be honest. Something went out of her when Neil died, some pilot light behind her eyes, and it never came back on. She lived for another 21 years. She died in 2010, in a hospice in Kingston, holding my hand. The last thing she said to me was, "Take care of your brother's grave." Not "I love you." Not "goodbye." Take care of your brother's grave. Because even after 21 years, that was where her mind lived. In that cemetery. With him. I have taken care of it. Every spring I plant marigolds along the border, because Neil liked the color orange. Every December I leave a small wreath. I have never missed a year. Until 11 days ago, I believed with every cell in my body that my brother was under that stone. The phone rang at 3:10 in the morning. The screen showed an unknown number. 705 area code. Sault Ste. Marie, or somewhere up there. Northern Ontario. I should not have answered. At 59, you know that calls at 3 in the morning mean someone is in the hospital or someone is dead or someone wants to sell you something. None of those are good. But something in me reached for the phone, the same instinct that used to make me check on Neil during thunderstorms when we were kids because he was afraid of lightning until he was 12 and would never admit it. Hello? I said. Breathing. Heavy, uneven, like someone who had been running or someone who was afraid. Ian? A man's voice. Rough, gravelly, the kind of voice that comes from years of cigarettes or years of not talking much. Is this Ian Hendricks? I sat up. My wife Judith stirred beside me but didn't wake. Who is this? I don't know how to say this. The voice cracked. I've been trying to figure out how to say this for 3 months, and I still don't know how. It's 3 in the morning, I said. Either tell me who you are or I'm hanging up. A long pause. Then, very quietly, my name is Neil. I think I'm your brother. The room went cold. Not metaphorically. I felt the temperature drop, felt the hair on my arms stand up, felt something shift in the air like the moment before a storm. My brother is dead, I said. He's been dead for 37 years. If this is some kind of scam, I know, he said. I know you think that. I thought I was nobody for most of my life. But 3 months ago, I found something, and I think there was a mistake. What did you find? A newspaper article. About the train derailment near Parry Sound. January 89. And there's a list of the people who died, and one of the names is Neil Hendricks, 17, from Kingston. And there's a photo. A school photo. And I know that face. I've seen it in my dreams my entire life and I never knew why until I saw that picture. My hands were shaking. I pressed the phone harder against my ear. Anyone could find that article, I said. That doesn't prove anything. I know, he said again. But I remember things. Not a lot. Just pieces. I remember a blue house with a porch that creaked. I remember a woman who made butter tarts at Christmas and she'd slap your hand if you tried to eat one before they cooled. And I remember a kid, an older kid, who used to read to me at night. Chapter books. Something about a dog. And he had this way of doing voices for the different characters. I couldn't breathe. Because the house on Clergy Street was blue. And my mother's butter tarts were legendary, and she absolutely would slap your hand, and I used to read Where the Red Fern Grows to Neil before bed, and I did voices for Billy and his dogs because it made Neil laugh. Where are you? I said. Sault Ste. Marie. There's a shelter on Queen Street. I've been staying here on and off for about 6 years. A woman who works here, Nora, she's the one who helped me find the article. She said I should call. Stay there, I said. Don't move. I'm coming. You don't have to, stay there. I hung up. I sat in the dark for maybe a minute, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Then I was out of bed, pulling on clothes, grabbing my wallet and keys from the dresser. Judith woke up this time. Ian? What's going on? I have to drive to the Sault, I said, and my voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. Now? Ian, it's the middle of the night. What happened? I looked at her, this woman I'd been married to for 31 years, and I opened my mouth and nothing came out. How do you say it? How do you tell someone that the brother you've been visiting in a cemetery for 37 years just called you on the phone? I'll explain when I get there, I said. When I understand it myself. I love you. Ian, but I was already in the hallway, already pulling on my boots, already out the door into the January cold that bit through my jacket like teeth. The drive from Kingston to Sault Ste. Marie is about 8 hours if the weather cooperates. The weather did not cooperate. It was snowing north of Barrie, and the 404 was down to one lane past Parry Sound. I didn't care. I drove through all of it with the wipers on high and my hands locked on the wheel at 10 and 2 and my mind spinning so fast I could barely hold a thought. I thought about that day in the morgue. I was 22. The face was damaged. I'd said yes because the hair was right. I'd said yes because I was terrified and grieving and I wanted to go home. What if I'd been wrong? What if, in my fear and my youth and my desperate need for this to be over, I'd looked at a stranger's body and called it my brother? And if that was true, then who was buried in St. Mary's Cemetery? Whose grave had I been tending for 37 years? Whose headstone bore my brother's name? I pulled over near Espanola and threw up on the side of the highway. Then I got back in the car and kept driving. I arrived in Sault Ste. Marie at 11:45 in the morning. The shelter on Queen Street was a squat brick building wedged between a pawn shop and a laundromat. The front steps were salted against the ice. A woman was sitting behind a folding table just inside the door, sorting donated coats by size. "I'm looking for someone," I said. "A man who's been staying here. He might go by Neil." She looked up. Mid-40s, short hair, tired eyes that had seen everything twice. "You must be Ian." She stood and extended her hand. "I'm Nora Beaulieu. I'm the one who convinced him to call you." He almost didn't. He was terrified you'd think he was crazy. "I don't know what I think," I said honestly. "Where is he?" "Back room. He's been sitting there since 6 this morning. Wouldn't eat, wouldn't move. Just kept saying, 'What if he doesn't come?'" She led me down a narrow hallway that smelled like soup and old carpet. At the end was a door with a small window in it. Nora stopped and turned to me. "Before you go in," she said, "I want you to know something. Whatever you see in there, whoever he is, he's a good man. He's had a hard life, harder than you can probably imagine. He volunteers here when he's well enough. Reads to the kids. Fixes things. He's gentle. Whatever happened to him, it didn't take that away." I nodded because I couldn't speak, and I pushed open the door. It was a small room with a few folding tables and chairs, a window that looked out on an alley. There was one person in the room. He was sitting at the table closest to the window, his back to me, and the first thing I noticed was how thin he was. Not lean the way Neil had been thin at 17, but diminished, like a plant that hadn't gotten enough light. His hair was gray and cut short, unevenly, like he'd done it himself. He was wearing a plaid flannel shirt that was too big for him, and his hands were flat on the table in front of him, palms down, like he was bracing for something. "Neil?" I said. He turned around. The face that looked at me was not my brother's face. It was the face of a man who had lived rough for decades, a map of scars and sun damage and sleepless nights. Deep lines around the mouth. A nose that had been broken at least once. Skin that was weathered and dry. He looked 70, not 54. But the eyes. The eyes were brown with a ring of green around the iris, exactly like our father's eyes, exactly like the eyes that used to look up at me from the other bed when I was reading about Billy Coleman and his 2 coonhounds. "You came," he said, and his voice broke on the second word. "Show me your right knee," I said. It came out harder than I meant it to, but I couldn't help it. I needed to know. He looked confused for a moment, then understanding crossed his face. He stood slowly, his movements stiff and careful, and he pulled up his pant leg above the knee. There, running diagonally across the kneecap, was a scar. Old, white, raised slightly from the skin. About 3 inches long. When Neil was 9 years old, he'd been playing hockey on the frozen pond behind our house and the ice gave way under him. His right leg went through and the edge of the ice cut him open. 14 stitches. I was the one who carried him home. I was 12, and he was bleeding all over my winter coat, and he kept saying, "Don't tell Mom, don't tell Mom," even though there was obviously no way to hide 14 stitches. I sat down. My legs simply stopped working, and I dropped into the nearest chair. He pulled his pant leg back down and sat across from me, watching me with those eyes, our father's eyes, and neither of us said anything for a long time. "Tell me what happened," I finally said. "Tell me everything." He rubbed his face with both hands. His fingers were thick and scarred, the nails cracked. Hands that had done hard labor for years. "I don't remember the crash," he said. "I remember the train. I remember the window seat. I remember it was dark and I was tired, and then nothing. Just cold. The worst cold I've ever felt. And then voices, but not words I could understand, just sounds. And then nothing again for a long time." He paused, staring at the table. "The first real memory I have is waking up in a bed that wasn't mine. A cabin somewhere. It smelled like wood smoke and diesel. There was a man standing over me, big man, and he said something like, 'Good, you're awake.' I tried to talk, but my head it felt like my skull was full of broken glass. I couldn't remember my name. I couldn't remember anything. Not where I was from, not how old I was, nothing." "Who was this man?" I asked. "His name was Clement. That's all I ever knew him by. He ran a logging operation up north of Chapleau. Off the books. No permits, no insurance, no questions. He had a crew of about 8 men, all of them with something to hide. Ex-cons, guys running from debts, guys with warrants. And me. A kid with no memory and no one looking for him." "He kept you," I said. The words tasted like poison. "He told me I'd been in an accident and he'd found me and taken care of me. He said I owed him. He said when I was well enough, I'd work off what I owed. I didn't know any different. I didn't know who I was. I didn't know I had a family somewhere. So I worked. For how long? Years. I lost count. There was no calendar. No newspaper. No radio. Just trees and saws and cold and work. Every day the same. He paid the others in cash. He didn't pay me at all. Said I was still working off my debt. When I got sick or hurt, there was no doctor. When I asked questions, he hit me. After a while, I stopped asking. I felt something rising in my chest, a rage so pure it was almost calm. How did you get out? There was a fire, he said simply. The bunkhouse caught fire one winter, maybe 97, maybe 98. I don't know. Everything was chaos. Men running. I ran, too, but I ran a different direction than the others. I just kept going. Through the woods, through the snow. I walked for 2 days. Almost froze. A trucker found me on the highway outside Wawa and drove me to the hospital in the salt. And they kept me for a week. Frostbite, malnutrition, infections. They asked me my name and I couldn't tell them. They asked where I was from and I couldn't tell them that either. They called the police, but I couldn't give them anything useful. No name, no ID, no memory of anything before the logging camp. The police filed a report. Nothing came of it. After I was discharged, I had nowhere to go. So I stayed. In the salt? For 28 years? He nodded slowly. Shelters when there was room. The street when there wasn't. I found work sometimes. Dishwashing, snow shoveling, loading trucks at the docks. Cash jobs. I got by. Some years were better than others. Some years were bad. He said it so simply. Some years were bad. Like he was talking about the weather. 3 months ago, he continued, Nora brought in a box of old newspapers for the recycling. She likes to go through them first, clip interesting articles. She showed me one. A retrospective piece some paper ran on the anniversary of the Perry Sound derailment. There were photos of the victims. And when I saw one of the faces, I don't know how to explain it. My whole body went electric. Like being struck by lightning. I knew that face. Not from a mirror. I don't look like that anymore. But from somewhere deep. From before. The school photo, I said. Your mother submitted it to the newspaper. Patricia Hendricks. And there was a quote from her in the article. She said, "My Neil loved winter. He loved the snow. It's cruel that the thing he loved is what took him away from us." And when I read that, I started to cry, and I didn't know why. But the word meal kept repeating in my head like a heartbeat. I was crying now, in that small room in a shelter in Sault Ste. Marie, because I remembered the day my mother gave that quote. I remembered her sitting at the kitchen table with a reporter from the Whig Standard, her hands folded in her lap, her voice perfectly steady, because my mother believed that grief was a private thing and you did not let strangers see you break. "Nora helped me search," he said. "She found your name. Ian Hendricks, brother. Kingston. She found a pharmacy on Princess Street with an Ian Hendricks listed as the owner." "That's you?" "That's me," I said. "I've been there 34 years. It took me 3 months to work up the nerve to call. I kept thinking, what if he doesn't believe me? What if I'm wrong? What if this is all just my broken brain making up a story because it can't stand not having one?" I looked at this man across from me, this thin, scarred stranger who might be my brother. "We need a DNA test," I said. "That's the only way to be sure." He nodded. "I know. I want to know, too. Even if it means finding out I'm nobody." "You're not nobody," I said, and I meant it, regardless of what the test showed. I found a private lab in Sudbury that could do expedited results. A 5-hour drive. I called and scheduled it for the next morning. Then I went to the front desk and told Nora I was taking him with me. "Where?" she asked. "Hotel tonight. Sudbury tomorrow for the test. And then we'll see." She looked at Neil, then at me. "Take care of him," she said quietly. "He's been taking care of himself for a long time. He deserves to have someone else do it for a while." We drove to a motel near the highway. Nothing fancy. 2 beds, a television, a bathroom that smelled like industrial bleach. I ordered Chinese food from a place down the road while Neil showered. He was in there for almost 40 minutes. When he came out, his face was flushed and he looked like a different person, or maybe like more of the same person. With the grime gone and his face clean, I could see it more clearly. The line of his jaw. The way his ears sat close to his head. Neil's ears. Our father's ears. We ate in silence for a while. Chicken fried rice and egg rolls on the bedspread, the television murmuring in the background. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Go ahead." "What was I like before?" The question hit me somewhere below the ribs. I set down my fork and leaned back. "You were kind," I said after a moment. "The kindest person I knew. You were the kid who'd spend an hour coaxing a stray cat out from under a porch. You wanted to be a park ranger. You used to say you wanted to live in Algonquin and talk to the bears." He smiled at that, just barely, a flicker. "You were funny. You could make Mom laugh even on her worst days, and after Dad died, she had a lot of worse days. You did impressions. Your Don Cherry was terrible but you didn't care. And you were tough. You fell through the ice when you were 9, cut your knee open to the bone, and you didn't cry. Not once. You just kept saying, 'Don't tell Mom.' You were bleeding all over me, and you were worried about Mom." He touched his right knee through his pant leg, tracing the scar. "I wish I could remember," he said. "Maybe you will." That night I lay awake in the motel bed and listened to him breathe. Slow, steady breaths, the breathing of someone who was, for the first time in a long time, sleeping somewhere he felt safe. I stared at the ceiling and thought about my mother. 21 years of grief that ate her alive, and the whole time her son was 80 kilometers north of Chapleau, cutting down trees for a man named Clement, unable to remember his own name. I did not sleep. We drove to Sudbury the next morning. The lab was in a medical building on Paris Street. Clean, professional, impersonal. A technician swabbed the inside of our cheeks, filled out paperwork, and told us results would take 48 hours. It took 36. I was in the hotel room in Sudbury when the call came. We'd stayed an extra day rather than drive back and forth. Neil was sitting on the edge of his bed, watching a hockey game on mute. The Leafs were losing, which felt appropriate. "Mr. Hendricks? This is Priya Okafor from Northern Genetics Lab. I'm calling with your results." My hand was shaking so badly the phone almost slipped out of my grip. I looked at Neil. He was watching me with an expression I will never forget, half terror, half hope. "The probability of siblingship between the two samples is 99.94%, she said. "The two individuals are, with statistical certainty, biological siblings." I don't remember what I said after that. I think I thanked her. I think she said she'd email the full report. I think I hung up. I'm not sure about any of it because the room had tilted sideways and everything was underwater. "It's you," I said. "You're Neil." He stared at me. Then he made a sound, not a word, just a sound, something between a gasp and a sob, and he covered his face with his scarred hands and his shoulders started shaking. I crossed the space between the beds and sat down next to him and put my arms around my brother. He was so thin I could feel his ribs through his shirt. He smelled like motel soap and something underneath that was older, deeper, the smell of years of cold and dirt and survival. I held him and he held me, and we stayed like that for a long time, two men in their 50s and 60s crying in a motel room in Sudbury while the Leafs lost on mute in the background. When we finally pulled apart, his eyes were red and swollen, but there was something different in them. Something I hadn't seen before. Like a door opening. "I'm Neil," he said, testing the words. "I'm Neil Hendricks from Kingston." "Yes," I said. "You are." "There's something we have to talk about," he said then, and his voice was steadier than mine. "The person in my grave. There's someone buried under my name who isn't me. Which means there's a family somewhere that's been missing someone for 37 years. They deserve to know." I nodded. I'd been thinking about this, too. It was the thing I couldn't stop thinking about, actually. "We need to call the police," I said. "They can exhume the remains, run DNA, try to match it to a missing persons case from around the time of the derailment." "Will you do that?" he asked. I'm not good with authorities. They make me nervous." "I'll handle it," I said. "I'll call the OPP as soon as we get home." "Home," he repeated, like it was a word in a foreign language. "Come home with me," I said. "To Kingston. Judith and I have a guest room. It's nothing fancy, but it's warm and there's a door that locks and no one will ask you to work off any debt." He flinched at that. "I don't want to be a burden." "Neil. You lived in a logging camp for almost a decade because a man told you that you owed him something. You don't owe anyone anything. You never did. Come home." He looked at me for a long time. Then he said, "Okay." We drove to Kingston the next day. 8 hours through the snow, but this time I didn't mind it. I kept looking over at him in the passenger seat, this ghost made solid, this impossibility sitting 3 feet from me, watching the Ontario landscape scroll past with wide eyes like he was seeing it for the first time. "I used to dream about trees," he said somewhere near Parry Sound. I thought it was just because I'd spent so many years around them. But maybe it was this. Maybe I was remembering driving through here as a kid. "We used to go camping at Kilbear every summer," I said. "You and me and Mom and Dad, before Dad died. You loved it. You'd be in the water all day. Mom couldn't get you out." He closed his eyes. "I can almost see it," he said. "Almost." Judith was waiting on the porch when we pulled into the driveway. I'd called her the night before and told her everything, and she'd gone through the same stages I had in about 30 seconds, disbelief, shock, tears, then a fierce, practical determination to make things right. "Bring him home," she'd said. "I'll get the room ready." She came down the steps as we got out of the car. She looked at Neil for a moment, this thin man in ill-fitting clothes with his scarred hands and his old man face. Then she stepped forward and hugged him, gently, like she was afraid he might break. "Welcome home, Neil," she said. He stood rigid for a second, his arms at his sides. Then, slowly, he put his arms around her and dropped his head against her shoulder, and I could see him trembling. "That was 2.5 months ago. I won't pretend it's been easy. Neil has nightmares. He wakes up screaming, sometimes in words, sometimes just sounds, and when Judith or I go to his room, he's pressed into the corner of the bed with his hands up like he's defending himself. It takes several minutes for him to remember where he is, to understand that he's safe. He sees a therapist twice a week, a trauma specialist at the Kingston Health Sciences Center named Dr. Ramesh Gill. Dr. Gill told me privately that Neil's case is one of the most severe he's ever encountered. Nearly a decade of captive labor, followed by 28 years of homelessness. Untreated head trauma. Dissociative amnesia. Complex PTSD. Recovery will be measured in years, not months, he said. But the fact that he called you at all tells me something important. Some part of him never forgot. Some part of him was fighting to get back. The memories come in fragments. Unpredictable, often triggered by small things. One morning, Judith was baking in the kitchen, and the smell of butter and sugar drifted through the house, and Neil stopped in the doorway and said, "Butter tarts." She made butter tarts. And he stood there with tears running down his face while Judith quietly kept baking and I quietly kept pretending to read the newspaper. He remembered the house on Clergy Street. Not all at once, but in pieces. The creak of the third step. The way the kitchen faucet dripped. The specific shade of blue on the front door. He remembered our father's voice but not his face. He remembered our dog, a beagle named Hank, and that Hank used to sleep on Neil's bed even though Mom said he wasn't allowed to. He remembered the book. There were dogs in it, he said one evening. 2 dogs. And a boy. And one of the dogs died, and the kid who was reading it to me was crying so hard he had to stop. I wasn't crying, I said. I had something in my eye. He almost laughed at that. Almost. I called the Ontario Provincial Police the week we got back. I explained the situation, provided the DNA results, and asked about exhuming the remains in St. Mary's Cemetery. The officer I spoke with was professional, careful, but I could hear the disbelief underneath. "You're telling me you identified the wrong body 37 years ago, and the person who was actually your brother just turned up alive?" "That's what I'm telling you," I said. "And the person buried under my brother's name has a family somewhere who doesn't know what happened to them. They opened a case. It's still ongoing. They'll need to exhume the remains and extract DNA, then run it against missing persons databases. There were 2 other passengers on that train whose bodies were never positively identified, cases from '89 that were eventually closed when families stopped pushing. Maybe the person in Neil's grave belongs to one of those families. Maybe their closure is 37 years overdue." I also told them about Clement. The logging camp north of Chapleau. What Neil had described. The constable took notes and said they would investigate, but he warned me that finding evidence of an off-the-books operation from the early 90s would be difficult. Clement could be dead. The camp could be gone. The forest takes back everything eventually. But I filed the report anyway, because someone should know. Because it should be on record somewhere that my brother was stolen and used and thrown away, and the man who did it should not get the luxury of being forgotten. My kids have met Neil. My daughter Megan drove up from Toronto the weekend after we brought him home. She stood in the living room and looked at her uncle, this uncle she'd grown up hearing was dead, and she didn't say anything for a long time. Then she said, "You have Grandpa's eyes," and Neil smiled, and that was that. My son Spencer was more cautious. He's a practical person, an engineer, and he struggled with the improbability of it. But he shook Neil's hand and said, "Welcome to the family," and he meant it. Spencer's daughter, Hazel, is 4 years old. She has no understanding of the strangeness of the situation and no interest in acquiring one. She has decided that Neil is her favorite person in the world. She brings him picture books and demands that he read them to her, and he does, stumbling over the words sometimes but trying, always trying. Last week she climbed into his lap without being invited, something she does with almost no one, and Neil looked at me over her head with an expression of such bewildered joy that I had to leave the room because I was going to cry, and I have been doing far too much of that lately. Neil got a part-time job last month. A hardware store on Division Street. Stocking shelves, helping customers find what they need. Simple work, but he's good at it. He's patient. He listens. He comes home tired, but not the kind of tired he's used to. A good tired, a normal tired. He's learning the difference. We went to the cemetery last week. Both of us. We stood in front of the headstone that reads Neil Hendricks, 1971 to 1989, beloved son and brother. He looked at it for a long time. Someone's under there, he said. Someone who had a name. Someone who had people who loved them. We're going to find out who, I said. I promise. He nodded. Then he knelt down and touched the stone, gently, the way you'd touch a sleeping child. I'm sorry, he said to whoever was down there. I'm sorry you ended up here. I'm sorry you got my name instead of your own. We're going to fix that. He asked me last week if I blamed myself for the misidentification. I told him the truth. Every day. Every single day since the phone rang at 3:10 in the morning. Stop, he said. We were sitting on the back deck, watching the snow fall on the yard. Judith was inside making dinner. The house smelled like roast chicken and garlic. You were 22 years old. They showed you a body that had been through a train wreck in January. You were terrified and grieving. You made the best call you could with what you had. If I'd looked more carefully, then maybe they'd have looked for me and found me at Clement's camp. Or maybe they wouldn't have. Maybe Clement would have moved. Maybe I'd have ended up somewhere worse. We don't know. We can't know. What I know is that you answered the phone at 3 in the morning because something told you to, and you drove 8 hours through the snow, and you didn't give up on me, not even when everything told you I was dead. That's enough. That's more than enough. He's right, probably. I'm working on believing it. Dr. Gill says guilt is a process, not a switch. You don't turn it off. You just learn to carry it differently. Some nights, when it's late and the house is quiet, I think about my mother. I think about her sitting in that hospice bed, holding my hand, telling me to take care of Neil's grave. And I wonder if she knew. Not consciously, not in any way she could have articulated, but somewhere deep down, in that place where mothers know things they can't explain, did she sense that something was wrong? That the person in that grave wasn't her son? Is that why she could never let go? I asked Neil if he thought about her. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I dream about a woman with dark hair who smells like vanilla. She's always standing in a kitchen. And she's always smiling. And I never want to wake up from that dream. That's Mom. That's Patricia Hendricks standing in her kitchen on Clergy Street with flour on her apron and a plate of butter tarts cooling on the counter, and she's smiling because her boys are home. Her boys are home. Not the way she imagined. Not the way any of us imagined. One of us is 59 with gray hair and a pharmacy and a family, and the other is 54 with scars on his hands and gaps in his memory and decades of lost time that can never be recovered. We are not the boys who grew up in the blue house on Clergy Street. We are something else now. Something harder and sadder and, in a way I am still learning to understand, something stronger. Last night, Neil and I sat on the deck after Judith had gone to bed. The sky was clear for the first time in weeks, and you could see the stars, really see them, the way you can when the air is cold enough to cut glass. Do you think she knows? Neil asked. Mom. Wherever she is. Do you think she knows I made it? I looked up at that vast, cold sky and thought about my mother's last words. Take care of your brother's grave. Maybe she wasn't telling me to tend a headstone. Maybe she was telling me to keep looking. Yeah, I said. I think she knows. He nodded. We sat there in the cold, shoulder to shoulder, watching our breath turn to vapor in the starlight. Two brothers. Separated by 37 years and a mistake and a man named Clement and the cruelty of a world that takes people and grinds them down and sometimes, against every odd, gives them back. I'm glad you answered the phone, he said. Me too, Neil. Me too. And I am. Despite the guilt and the grief and the fury at everything that was stolen from us, I am grateful, because my brother came back. Not whole, not unscarred, not the boy who stood on that platform at the Kingston station with a backpack and a grin. But alive. Breathing. Here. Sitting next to me on a deck in January, watching the stars, learning how to be a person with a name and a family and a home. And if that's not a miracle, I don't know what is.